So I am, in fact, Sharon, Fekete, Fekete, Fekute. It doesn't actually matter. I'm very grateful today, of course, to be here, to say thank you to my friends at the Florida Senior Living Association. Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed my talk this morning with my table. Can I get a shout out from the table? Yeah. We've been talking all things mental health this morning. So in order for me to give you a talk that will keep you awake, I'm kidding. In my opinion, telling a story is always the way to connect to somebody's heart. There's actually evidence-based practices today that in fact say storytelling is a great way to get your message across and to help everybody to feel comfortable in the space that they are, especially when talking about such a tough conversation, right? There's a lot of vulnerability in talking about mental health, especially in the workplace. So to go hand in hand with my storytelling, that is actually my house that I grew up in. 6 Lawrence Street, Long Island, New York. So if you start, yeah, can I get a yeah for New York? Long Island in the house, I love it. Yes, I heard a yes, we'll talk later. So not many things that I remember from when I first moved into that house at 5, but I do remember that my phone number is area code 516-593-9855. I don't remember anybody's phone number today, but I do remember that one. I'm sure some of you can relate. And I'm not sure if you can see that, but on top of that house, for the younger people in here, that's called an antenna. Yes. That's what we had to use for our television sets. So, you know, that home was filled with a lot of love. My parents are still with me today. They are in Tampa Bay, Florida. They got married at a very young age, which was the norm, in their early 20s. I have 2 brothers. They immigrated here from Dublin, Ireland, hence the green. And if you were to talk to them today, you would never know that they lived anywhere else but Dublin, Ireland, because they still sound like 2 leprechauns. My mom grew up with 12 brothers. I know. I always, yes, I have 2, that's enough. And my dad has 8 in his family. So to say that we are Irish is the understatement of the world. They did not have television in Ireland, from what I understand. I'm kidding. Of course they did. They just made babies. So I grew up in a very big, large Irish family filled with christenings and communions and funerals and lots of wakes. We do all of those things very well, the Irish. But it was a very happy home, a very happy home. My brothers still live in New York. I do not live there anymore, but I was built in that house. Anybody know that song by Miranda Lambert, The House That Built Me? Can I see you? Yes. Well, that's the house that built me. I'm not going to sing. Okay, yeah, there I am. Who laughed? How dare you? So that's little Sharon. That's me in 5th grade, okay? That's Sister Maria Melda. I remember her very well. And those are all of my classmates, and I remember every single one of their names. I want you to take notice of how happy we looked. We were in 5th grade, okay, right before the hormones started to really kick in. I was athletic, but at this stage, I really started to become very aware of my body and how I looked. I was a little chubby. You see the little chubby face up there? And I started getting really self-conscious about that. Now, in that house that I showed you before, nobody cared. But the outside, you know, you get around some kids, they can be mean. So I started to become aware at just about this time about the physical, okay? And if you'll notice, the attitude changes in the classmates from that picture to this picture. Do you see the little anger shift there? Anybody else notice that? Well, that was me, and those were my really bad bangs. And I don't know who else grew up in the 80s, but I couldn't get my hair any higher, okay? Aquanet. Does anybody remember Stiff Stuff? Yes, I saw that hand back there. The higher the hair. Sister Francine, okay? She has her hand on the chair in front of her. This is for you, Dawn. That's my girlfriend, Dawn Smith. She was the real troublemaker in my class. Also a very good friend of mine. And that one in the center that really looks angry, that was my best friend. That was Chrissy Amthor. She, today, is a captain of the East New York Police Department. Yeah. Anybody been to East New York? So we were best friends. You know, she was very popular. I was not. But I became very popular when I became friends with Chrissy Amthor. That's how it went. She brought me out of this shell that I was in. I was an honor student. I was very athletic. But I started to become, well, angry in that picture. But I started to become very much more aware of how I looked, how I felt. I started breaking out at a very young age as a teenager with acne. And remember, my parents are from Ireland. So when I would ask my parents, because even though like I lived in New York, I really lived in Ireland. You know what I mean? Anybody come from immigrant parents, first generation? Yeah, I really lived in Ireland. So every time I would come home to my mom and say, oh my God, my skin is so bad and everybody's looking at my skin, she would say, Asher, we'll put some milk on your face. Some milk on my face, okay. My parents both worked in hospitals. So my dad worked at New York Hospital for 42 years, and my mother worked at South Nassau Hospital as an EKG and then echo tech, who went back to school in her 40s, had a third child, my younger brother, who's 10 years younger than me, put herself back in school, became an echo tech, and medical has been around us my whole life. So I started to drink at this age. I started to dabble in alcohol. I didn't want to think about how I looked and how I felt. And I knew if I had a few beers, I'd feel better about myself. I'd be more like Chrissy Amthor, right? So I went to a private school called Kellenberg Memorial, right? Good Irish Catholics kept me in private school. Everybody else in that class went to a public school, which is where I wanted to go. Please, let me dress normal. What I would give to wear a uniform every day today seems a lot easier. But I really and truly started to really separate from this girl that was raised in that house in my mind. So here comes the fun stuff. By the time I was 18, on the left-hand side, that is actually Mount Monadnock. Anybody know Mount Monadnock in New Hampshire? You do? Get out of here. I climbed that mountain. It's taken me all these years, though, to be able to say Monadnock. But by the time I was 18 years old, I was in my first rehab. I came home one night, after a night of drinking, of course, to my family, who was sitting there to do a family intervention. So it was my mom, my dad, my uncle, my godfather. And they were waiting to tell me that I was going away to New Hampshire to a rehab. I thought, well, that seems strange. Aren't most kids going off to college? I wasn't in any way, shape, or form did I think that I had a problem with alcohol. I was just having a good time. Yeah, I would stay out late, or I wouldn't come home. I was just having a good time. Everybody else in my family drank. I am Irish. But I definitely took it a little too far, so my parents thought, you know, 18 years old, it's time. So they sent me to this beautiful rehab, which I like to call day camp. You know, my parents, again, Ireland, right? It wasn't really New York, it was Ireland. There's no such thing as like before care and after care where I grew up. There was, you take care of yourself. And they worked full time, and they were raising 3 children. So I'm now in this rehab at 18 years old, and the first rehab was for adolescents. So everybody in this rehab were ages 14 to 21. So I had a blast, in other words. I was surrounded by my people. I was climbing a mountain, for God's sakes. I was waking up doing yoga. You know those sessions that you were having the last 3 days? Anybody show up to those anyway to do some wellness, I hope? I was doing that every morning in those rehabs. And I got into 2 rehab romances, not 1, but 2. And the story of my life which you'll see soon, would be that I left with some guy, you know? I never felt good about me, but I felt good about me if I was either drinking or if I was just immersed in somebody else's life, like a prisoner I would take in from rehab. So I followed this one relationship from this rehab back to his house. He didn't ask me, but I followed him back after my first rehab. And then, you know, progression set in. So if any of you have been touched by the disease of alcoholism or addiction, maybe not you, maybe a family member, or you heard about somebody in the family, then you've heard about the term progression. So progression is very, very severe in my story. So it progressively got worse. So I went from having just a few beers because I didn't feel good about myself, to when I turned 19 and got arrested. So there was a girl yesterday who asked me, we were talking about allergies. Her name was Tia. Is Tia here? Oh, that's too bad, Tia. We were talking about allergies, and she said, you know, I'm allergic to this, this, and that. And I said, well, I'm allergic to alcohol. I break out in handcuffs. I think she was in shock. If she was here, she would now understand what I was talking about. So I got arrested at 19, and it's not even a good enough story to tell right now. But I'll be here in the back. My husband, Rob, put your hand up. Yeah, he's going to kill me for this one. Come see me with Rob, and I'll tell you the story. It's not that good, though. I promise there'll be more later. So I get arrested, and now I'm mandated to go away to a rehab. So I don't have a choice. There's no family intervention. But my parents now at the time, again, if you know anything about alcoholism and the disease of alcoholism, they started going to this program called Al-Anon. In my mind, it was the complete enemy. Al-Anon, the whole thing, teaching my parents tough love. So they let me stay in jail for the night. So I stay in jail for the night. I wake up, they hire a lawyer, Stuart Sirota, I'll never forget him, don't know where he is, but I talk about him all the time now. Had to put my hand on a Bible in a courtroom and say I would never drink again, and off I went to my second rehab. It's really nice, I must say. These day camps that I was visiting were great. You know, I never really got to have that before care and after care, but I did get rehab. So now I'm in rehab number 2. There's people in there for like relapse prevention, and I have a roommate who's there for relapse prevention, and they start talking to me about the disease. I hear it a little bit more now, you know, because I got arrested and I'm mandated, and I'm like, my parents are struggling with me, and my brothers, you know, my brother was 10 years younger than me, so they didn't know what was happening. So by the time I got to my second rehab, they told me while I was in rehab that I was mandated to a halfway house, which was a good idea, because had they told me sooner, Sharon might not have landed in that rehab. Because at 19 years old, I had a lot to do. Now, I had no job. I wasn't in college, but I had a lot to do. I had a lot more partying to do, is basically what I'm trying to say. So at 19 years old, I'm told I'm going to go to Bolger House in Poughkeepsie, New York. Now, they called it Poughkeepsie, New York. I didn't call it Poughkeepsie, New York. It's Poughkeepsie. And now I'm in this halfway house, and all of these people around me have like suffered from heroin, and some are homeless, and you know, I felt like I didn't belong there. I would tell them about that house that I showed you in the beginning. I would say, I come from a residential area. Yeah, what does that even mean? But that's what I said, you know, I didn't understand these city folk. So the depression started to seep in about the first month of being in this halfway house. And thank goodness Mom and Dad stopped going to the enemy. No more Al-Anon. So they came and picked me up. And they were what we like to call enablers. I loved my enablers. Come get me out of this hellhole. They want me to mop the floor and get a job. So they picked me up. And oh, let's not go there yet, because that's a fun place. I love my slides. Nothing like slides. Thanks to Stevens and Monica in the back. So what happened was I got back to Long Island, New York, that house that I showed you in the beginning, and I'm very depressed, and I start drinking again. I mean, obviously, don't you guys see that happening? But that progression that I mentioned before got a lot worse, and I started drinking a lot more, and it turns out I do, in fact, have an allergy to alcohol. And this time, I blacked out, and I woke up in the state of Michigan. That's right. This is my life, everybody. So that is Brent's place, where the friendly people meet. Can everybody read the sign? That's what it says. Doesn't that look friendly? Doesn't that look like a place you want to go? Well, my goal living there was to live above the bar. You see those windows? 19 years old, homeless, addicted, and I became like all of those people that weren't from a residential area. So how did I get to Detroit, Michigan? I don't know. No, I do know. His name was Spokane. Now, I thought that was a nickname. It turns out it was an alias. I didn't know why he called himself Spokane. I didn't know Spokane was in Washington. I thought it was like spoke of a bicycle, cocaine mixed together, Spokane. I didn't care, right? It was always going to be some guy. I left with some guy. And I guess I left him for Bear, full name Sugar Bear. He had just gotten out of Jackson State Penitentiary for doing 11 years, kingpin drug dealer. Lucky me. Jealous, ladies? So, this is really my life, everybody. So, Sugar Bear was not a nice man, even though the name sounds like it. And he beat me up pretty bad. And I was blacked out in another state with my parents now going to Al-Anon and thinking about how are they going to get through this. They would get a phone call every once in a while from a police officer that said that they found their daughter's wallet in a dumpster. I can't imagine I had a wallet, though. You know, things were bad. Maybe my photo ID. And I'm quite sure that that was some really hard times for my parents. So from 19 to 21, I stayed in Detroit, Michigan. And then Bear dropped me off at that bar where the friendly people meet after beating me up. And the bartender that lived above the bar, named Larry, and he was friends with Papa Homie and Clarence. Like, I remember all their names. They all had aliases. They all said they were nicknames, though. And I got a Greyhound bus ticket to go back home after they gave me that beer with a straw in it. That's not the actual bus, but that is a Greyhound, and I am going back to New York. So after spending, I don't know if anybody's been on a Greyhound bus for 10 hours, but after spending 10 hours on a Greyhound bus next to a very smelly man, you start to think about your life. And I was 21 years old, and I was broken. I had been homeless. I hadn't seen my family since I was mandated to that rehab. And now I'm going home. Yep, she's back. And thank goodness for this home. It was filled with love, so I had that going for me. But everybody in that house was now tiptoeing like this, walking on eggshells. Don't bring up Detroit, Michigan, whatever you do. Don't talk to Sharon about her drinking. We're just glad she's alive. It's a miracle she's alive. And in walked depression again. So after being in this house, 21 years old, in the bedroom upstairs, on the right window, I started planning my suicide. My father, while I was gone, in Detroit, as he calls it, started going to an EAP counselor. Now, EAP, for those of you that don't know, is an employee assistance program. We love EAPs. Anybody have an EAP? Put your hands up. That's fantastic. Okay. Well, it turns out that's not the right slide. That's okay. Oh, there you go. That is my EAP counselor. That is actually the EAP counselor that I saw when I was 21 years old. That is the only picture of Ben Figueres on the internet. It's not a great one. I'm quite sure he wouldn't be thrilled about this one. I have been in touch with him since I wrote my book. But that was my father's EAP counselor. So to think that 28 years ago, my father was working at New York Hospital, struggling with the fact that his daughter was in Detroit, Michigan, strung out on drugs and alcohol. And he was going to see this EAP counselor. So he said, Sharon, listen, my dad and I are a lot alike. We got that Irish humor. We like to have a little fun, but we really don't believe people too much right away. You know, we're a little suspicious. That's why we make good bosses. Kidding. Not kidding. So Ben Figueres and I spent every Tuesday together for 6 months. And that man asked me the most important question that I've ever been asked in my life. Are you having suicidal thoughts? The answer was yes. He was the first person I ever told that to. So, why do I love EAPs? An EAP saved my life. I want to make a song about that. There's a song called Last Night a DJ Saved My Life. How about an EAP? So, my slides aren't in order. Sorry, guys. We're going to walk through this anyway. He saves me. I start going into Alcoholics Anonymous, and there's this crane that I represent in my story a lot, okay? So it just picked me up out of Detroit, Michigan, put me on a Greyhound bus, put me back into Long Island, New York. Ben Figueres picked me up out of my depression, told me about recovery. I started going to meetings. He shared his story with me. So that's an important point that I make to you today. The reason that I was able to feel comfortable with him was because he told his story to me. He too was in recovery. And he had all of these certificates and licenses, and he was helping me at New York Hospital. So him disclosing himself was a big piece of me getting sober. So now, it takes a lot of time to recover, and I've said recovered because today, as of August 11th, 1994, I am sober 28 years. Thank you. I mean, when I was drinking, nobody was clapping, so I'll take it. Thank you. The crane to recovered is a long one. But I will tell you that everything that happened to me in my recovery, in those rehabs, in those halfway houses, planning my suicide, meeting that EAP, has led me to all of these unbelievable jobs and business. But my learning how to be a recovered alcoholic has helped me the most in business. And I'm going to tell you why now. So I landed in the medical field, toxic job number 1. We see that on the bottom? Any of you ever worked in a toxic job? No. So unlike my parents, I really did not ever want to work in a hospital. No offense to anybody that works in one. Sight of blood scares me. But I loved business. So I started working at a company called New York Medical. We had 11 offices and 42 satellite offices. That's right. There were only 5 of us on the operations team. So I'm going to say this again. We had 11 offices and 42 satellite offices, and there were 5 of us on the operations team. So before that term burnt out became like a buzzword, that's what it feels like to me now. Anybody that talks about burnout, that's fantastic. I'm glad we're talking about something. But there was no such thing as a term like burnout back in the day. We were just tired. We were just overworked. But you know, that place that I worked at for all those years was perfect for me because there was so much trauma living inside of me that I pushed down, that my family, remember I was walking on, everybody was walking on eggshells, that me going into a toxic environment was perfect for me. Why was it perfect? Because I didn't have to think about anything that ever happened to me before. All of that stuff that happened was in the past. Have you ever heard that before? Pull yourself up by your bootstraps. So now, I guess I'm experiencing burnout because there's 11 offices and 42 satellite offices. Now, burnout is actually an ICD-10 code for all of our healthcare professionals out there. We know, International Classification of Diseases. It's a thing. Burnout is real. And let's wait. Let's stay on burnout for a minute. But I realized that this was the kind of environment that I thrived in. Just because the neurologists and the orthopedists and the internal medicine doctors were screaming at me in the hallway, I was fine with it. I've been in worse situations, I would think in my head. So now I stay in this job for a while. You know, my boyfriend had a girlfriend, no big deal. You ever have a boyfriend that had a girlfriend? I know I'm not alone. My boyfriend had a girlfriend. My company is going bankrupt because we had 11 offices and 42 satellite offices, and there was a team of 5, and it was run by a doctor. I love my doctors. Doctors are really great at saving lives, not always great in business. So the crane picks me up again, and it's like, you know, I think you'd be better off here in Florida. So I was early 30s. I'd been through a lot in my life. The company went bankrupt. I didn't want to go into Manhattan again. And I thought, you know, those people in Florida seem really happy. Every time I would vacation in Florida, people seemed really happy. The sun was always shining. People said hello. And I said, I think I'm going to go to Florida. But you know, I'm attracted to toxic work environments. So I went from a toxic work environment to another toxic work environment. Now, who knew that there'd be toxic work environments in Florida too? Shocking. So there's no such thing as a privately held, huge organization like I left. So I decided to work in pediatrics. So I went from adult medicine to pediatrics. And the doctors that were interviewing me said, you know, there's only one thing. Now, I had, you know, been in charge of a lot. Doctors worked for us. It was a big corporation. He's like, you know, you've just never worked in pediatrics before. I was like, I don't know, like a flu, cold, I think I'm good. I'm not going to be treating the children. You actually don't want me to. But in this place, I really loved it because, again, I was very comfortable in a toxic environment. I hadn't really worked everything out inside of myself. So there was like, you know, an affair, not with me. I was sober, remember? I don't do those things anymore. My boyfriend had a girlfriend. I didn't do that. There was an affair. There was also a pipe bomb. Did you hear me? A pipe bomb involved. So again, another story, not for right now, but if you want to see me, my husband's in the back there. I'll be hanging out with him later. I'll tell you the story about the pipe bomb. But that's an actual thing that happened. But I was so used to trauma and keeping everything I'm going to protect everybody. I'm going to protect everybody. I'm going to protect all of my staff, all of my doctors, until I couldn't anymore. So after 8 years, which was 8 years too long of working in that practice, I opened the Dr. Whisperer and 13th Avenue Media. So now I have this great opportunity to go into other businesses to see if your business is toxic too. No, I would get hired by practices to come in and restructure them. So I would go in and restructure them, and what happened was, like, they didn't just have a problem with marketing. They didn't just have a problem with staffing. They had a problem in the workplace. And I felt it in every workplace that I went to. So one of the things that I would do is if the doctor said, Sharon, I need you to help us with marketing, because I own a media company too, and we do social media, he would say, I really need you to help us with marketing. We really need to grow. And I would say, fantastic. I want to meet your staff. And I would sit down with all of the staff, and I would ask them 5 questions. I've never changed these 5 questions. I will never change these 5 questions. But I would ask them 5 questions. Number 1, how long have you worked here? Do you love your job? Do you hate your job? What are you doing to grow the business? How are you helping? And last but not least, how do you like to be rewarded? How do I like to be rewarded? Nobody ever asked me that, Sharon. And then they would cry, right? So I never left my house without a box of Kleenex, because I knew somebody was crying to me. It would be nice, Sharon, if somebody asked me how I was doing. It would be nice if somebody said, thank you. I see some heads nodding. Okay, so the best response to burnout is to focus on fixing the workplace versus fixing the worker. And those little burning heads down there, that's what they are. That's burnout. You can call it whatever you want. We're talking about mental health, okay? So in 2019, I decided to write this book, and I'm going to tell you why I decided to write this book, because I was working with the highest level of physicians, surgeons, cardiologists. It was a pretty fancy life. We'd go to places like the Boca Raton. Oh, have you heard of it? And they would tell me stories when I would reveal myself to them about what had happened to their child, what was happening with their sister, or their brother that died by suicide. So I wrote this book because I didn't want anybody to feel alone anymore. I didn't write it to get rich off of Amazon. Jeff Bezos has all that money, thank you very much. But I understand that time is coming to a close, but I want to make sure that you understand some of these realities today. And the reason that I know these realities is because I did write that book in 2019, and I would do these speaking events, and I would talk about mental health and burnout, and an HR rep would get up in front of the room, and they would talk about the mental health benefits that the company had. We're talking Franklin Templeton, Raymond James, huge IT companies, and then I would do a book signing in the back, and everybody would tell me their secrets. We never knew we had mental health benefits here, Sharon, until you got here. Nobody ever talks about mental health in our workplace. And I would literally never tell anybody that I was having a hard time with my own mental health, because I'd be afraid that I would never get promoted. I would be afraid that I would get fired. I'm never going to talk about that stuff here, Sharon. I don't trust the HR rep. And you know what? That's up to the leaders. The leaders are the ones that are supposed to actually be making sure that these HR reps, or whoever it is that is dealing with your staff, we don't need them to be therapists. They didn't go to school to become therapists, but they have a responsibility. It's called human resources, right? But if you don't feel comfortable and there's no courageous space there, it's going to be really tough to have a conversation about what's going on in your life. So it turns out EAPs actually work. Asking somebody how they're doing actually works. Embracing vulnerability. If somebody has the courage to share what they've been through, I promise you, somebody will share something that you need to know as an employer. When somebody is screaming in the middle of the office, it's usually not because you didn't get, the chart to them in time, or that the fax machine is down. I can't even believe we're still talking about faxes. It's 2023. But it's absolutely okay to be not okay, and it's absolutely okay to ask for help. And if that's not the message that you're hearing in your organization today, I wish somebody would be brave enough to speak to somebody about it. This is why we have turnover. This is why we can't recruit staff, because these spaces are not safe for everybody. So that's my favorite word, communication. The only way to normalize the conversation surrounding mental health is to actually talk about it. I purposely called my book The Broken Road to Mental Health because I know nobody wants to say mental health. On the plane right here, I got a magazine, and on the cover it said mental health, and I proudly read through it on the airplane because I wanted people to see that this is okay. But that word stigma you'll never see through any of my slides, because at this stage, we need to normalize this conversation. Mental health and physical health are actually the same. Nobody eats a box of Twinkies because they feel great about themselves. I don't even know why I say Twinkies anymore. People don't even eat Twinkies. These two amazing people are no longer on this earth. That's Lance. He was a former NBA player and an executive working for ESPN. And that woman on the bottom is Kate Spade. You might have heard of her. She's also an entrepreneur that died by suicide. When I look at a table that's empty before I do a talk today, I'm always happy because I feel like we're honoring those that have been lost, that have gone too soon, because there wasn't a safe space. Nobody thinks that looking at an executive or an NBA player or a fashion icon like Kate Spade would ever have any reason to take their own life. But I promise you, that person that is showing up every day and smiling, that's really strong, that's funny, those are the ones you need to check on. So there's a lot of resources that you're definitely not going to be able to read right now, but they are in your app. And my kind of resources are not like everybody else's. They're a little more practical. And I'm happy to send them to anybody that wants them. When I ran a pediatric office for 8 years, the doctors knew that I was sober. So when they were bringing the child in, because we worked in a very luxury type community, and when they would sneak them in the back door when they've been Baker acted, or cutting themselves, or ODing, they would come to me and ask me where we should send them, what rehab. Like, no need. Yes, rehabs are great. I'm not here to say rehabs aren't great. But there's a lot of free resources. Not everybody has health insurance. There's a lot of free resources out there. And 988, thank goodness, that is available today. Listening is not actually waiting for your turn to talk. And I find that most with employers, they're not listening to their staff. So if you have the courage and you have the nerve to actually ask somebody how they're doing, take the time to listen to it. Don't just wait for your opportunity to talk. Some people just need somebody else to listen. And why is this so important today in the workplace? Because we're spending all of our time there. So if you want to get in touch with me, or if you want to give Jeff Bezos some money, you could buy my book. I have 5 books in the back of the room that I'm happy to give to anybody that has the courage to walk around with a book that says mental health. Be happy to give it to you. And you can link with me by scanning that. I don't have a fax number. And I'm at 39 minutes and 9 seconds. So I would just like to say thank you for listening to me. I hope you go out and have the courage to ask your staff how they're doing, because sometimes it's just that simple. How are you today? If you can't afford the mental health benefits, if you can't afford EAPs, just start asking people how they're doing, and then listen to them. Thank you.